So my name is Kat Higgins, and I'm just insatiably curious. So when I hear about something cool, I want to learn more about it, and I go knocking on people's door and strong arming them to find out a little bit more about, in this case, self-management. So my background is corporate transformation, largely in mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. For the most part, I was representing technology spaces, but we were leading offerings related to agility, which is about a skip and a jump away from self-management. So sometimes referred to as the next self-management is sort of the next evolving level after agility, but we could look at it many different ways. But that's me. Happy to be here facilitating this awesome panel of people who have done communities in the past. So who would like to do some first on our panel? I'd like you, if you don't mind, answering your name, your community, and the goal or vision of your community, or maybe what made it different. Just one thing about your community. Let's start with Rhea.
I'll start. Hi, I'm Rhea. I'm based here in Switzerland, and I co-founded Teal Around the World in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic when everyone was, well, we were basically put on shelter in place, I would say. That was the term they used before. And there was just a growing need from everyone to connect and to just find a way around like a different type of leadership that was emerging at that time, fear-based, and was really it was bringing a lot of people down. And so we thought like, okay, how about running a webinar? And then we were like, no, but that's not inclusive enough. If we really want to reach the other part of the world, let's make it a 24-hour conference. And that's how Teal Around the World was born. And it was a lovely 3-year run until the doors opened, and we thought like virtual was not, of course, feasible at that time. So we decided to kind of sunset the initiative.
Thank you. And Matthew? Do you go by Matt, or is it always Matthew, by the way?
It's Matthew is a byline, but friends call me Matt. So yeah, everybody, it's Matt. I'm here in San Francisco. I'm part of the Teal team. Most people know us as the publisher of the Teal Landscape Report, which we've now done 3 editions, trying to showcase teal companies around the world and actually research it almost like market research. We thought that was a hole that needed to be filled. Our little team has a lot of different flavors and purposes. One of our purposes is to try and glue the movement together. So that's why we are doing that report, among other things. We were speakers and facilitators for Teal Around the World as well.
Thank you. Dachi?
Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Dachi, but Dachi is easier and fast way to pronounce my name. Actually, I'm from Brazil. I'm based in Toronto, living here the last 4 years, and here today I'm representing the Corporate Rebels Network. Specifically, we have a Rebel Cell kicking off next week here in North America. So connecting companies from Canada, US, and probably in the future, Mexico, let's see. But today I'm here representing Corporate Rebels, and this network has started, I think, 3 years ago. The Corporate Rebels itself, like they are on the road for the last 10 years, just providing content related to not only self-management, but progressive organizations. And this initiative about connecting companies would like to exchange like their challenges and barriers or anything else related to self-management, but something quite like new, like based on the last 3 years. And now we have those cells when we can connect people with the same legal cultural aspects. So this is pretty much what we are kicking off here in North America. But also I was part of like other networks in Brazil and Latin America, and also somehow from Teal Around the World. So yeah, happy to share my experience in all of these communities. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much. Robin?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Kat, for putting this on. It's a pleasure to be here. I came into a community called Responsive Org. That's also the URL in 2015. It was written as a manifesto, kind of in the spirit of the original Agile manifesto by a handful of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and organizational designers out of New York. Adam Pisoni, who built Yammer, among others, Alexis Gonzalez-Black, who rolled out Holacracy at Zappos. And I am by trade a professional dilettante. I've been a bootstrapped entrepreneur across 5 different companies, and I've worked in about 35 different industries in the last 35 years. The math there is complicated. And I wanted to help. I had seen the same dysfunctions in my dad's SMB growing up as an acrobat with the San Francisco Opera, running a little restaurant in San Francisco that I started with no restaurant experience in 2016. And I read in the Responsive Manifesto language about how we could organize differently. And specifically, it's not pedagogical. It is not saying, go adopt, I'll call out whatever, sociocracy, because this will solve all of your problems, or go follow Steve Jobs' example of dictatorial, benevolence, and everything will work out for you and your organization. It really laid out the ways in which work is changing and work needs to evolve based on the needs of that specific organization. I asked what I could do to help. I ended up running a free unconference in early 2016 that blew up. We had 300 people come from all over the state of California, from Washington, from as far away as LA and Seattle, which in this crowd is not very far. But for me, running a tiny little unconference was a big deal. And to keep it short, I asked what I could do to move it forward and ended up building a conference. So all we do primarily these days is one annual conference in the Bay Area, though it's been all over the US, and we've been running that since 2016. So it's a global community. It's a manifesto, it's a newsletter, but mostly it's a once a year, about 300-person conference that happens in the Bay.
Very fun. When is the next one?
September 23, 24.
Nice. I think we found out about you because our first speaker spoke there. Doug Kirkpatrick spoke there.
Yep. Doug has been a part of Responsive since the very early days. I think he actually came to that very first unconference in early 2016.
Nice. Hey, and Dom?
Hey, everybody. I'm Dom DiChiara. I am the co-founder of Self-Management USA. I also have a background in building teams and organizations with adaptive and efficient operating constructs. I live out in the Charlotte area with my wife and 2 kids. And, getting into the self-management space, being in the agile space, right? There's a lot of meetups that I think was central to my development as I was learning. It connected us up. It spread the knowledge, but also created a community. It really allowed us to live the manifesto, right? We were finding better ways of doing agile by doing it and helping others to do it. And, agile has its kind of fluctuations. So wanted to take that same space, that same mentality, and like Kat said, self-management in a way is the next step, at least for me, and how I'm interpreting, my journey of finding better ways of working together and creating a culture where we are our best selves. So yeah, formed Self-Management USA in 2025, so long ago, and long ago. So we want to replicate that model. We want to keep it kind of like a lower entry, no paywall, just get people excited, maybe energize the market a little bit. And also, we were living the Agile Manifesto in the meetups, also here to try to be self-managing as we build a community to learn about self-management. So try to eat our own dog food, as I've heard recently from an expert who I know, and have these calls, but also just let other people kind of lean into what the umbrella means to them, wikis, cases, local meetups, whatever it is. And yeah, that's about it. Yep. So I'll turn it back to Kat.
Sounds good. Thanks for that. So just in case you didn't catch it, Dom and I are the co-founders of this. Since I'm facilitating, he's kind of speaking for this community or what this community will be or could be. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions. We asked some of the panelists if they wanted to give us questions, they could, and if not, then feel free to answer whatever comes up. So the one that I had for everybody that I just want to start off conversation with is, what makes somebody self-managing? Where's the line between highly empowering or anything that could be peripheral to self-managing, but you would look at that organization and say, I personally would not really consider them self-managing. Keep in mind that the context for answering this is on this call. We're all live, but I'd love to get some clips too. So if we can try and allow people to finish their answers, but also if you are on the call and you would like to answer that, throw it in the chat. We'd love to hear all the thoughts too. Let's be self-managing. Who'd like to answer first? Has a thought to share?
I mean, I'll just draw on your very first speaker, Doug, right? Our mutual friend, Doug Kirkpatrick. I found his don't use force and keep your commitments, right? The 2 Morningstar principles to be very, very useful. I don't think of self-management as a binary, right? Like, what does it mean for this panel, this group of people to be self-managed, right? It's like, well, we could decide who's going to speak entirely based on consensus and spend an entire hour just debating who's going to speak next. Or we can just be humans and not use force and not one person dominate the stage, i.e. not use force, right? And so I think of those 2 as guideposts to assess without ever having a binary answer. Is something self-managed? Is something not?
So no strong arming.
Except to pull children out of the way of buses.
Oh, there we go.
So for the
Thanks,
teal
Rob.
landscape report, when we're trying to answer that question, we have a maturity model that has 5 levels. And one of the grades we have is self-managing. Like you at level 1 or 0, or you all the way up at 5, which we would consider transformational. So I agree with Robin. It's not a binary. It's what's working in this organization, and it's intent as much as practice, right? We want to be self-managing. We may not be there yet, or we may not be there all the time in every single thing we do, but that's our direction, that's our purpose. And so for us in the report, we have to see people that we would guess would be at like a level 3. They're doing it most of the time in most of the places, but maybe not completely organized, maybe not all the time.
I like that intent. Intent matters. It reminds me of servant leadership. Like, I had someone once tell me, you can't call yourself a servant leader. And I thought, I can do whatever I want. but are you a servant leader if you're intending to build servant leadership into your practices? I mean, that's intent is a considerable factor there. Yeah, love that. Who else has something they'd like to share or ask?
You're on mute, Rita.
Sorry. Happy to share one of the roles that we had at Life Sciences. So Life Sciences is one of the proponents of Teal Around the World. So that was a company I used to work for. And we had a role called Me, Myself, and I as an integrated part of the system. And the way I see self-management is basically, well, I am an integral part of the system, and I can take decisions based on the role that I have within that system, but I also consult with the rest of the organization, with the rest of the system, on how I show up and how we take decisions together. So the way I see self-management is basically that I manage the stuff that is in front of me, including raising tensions when I see them happen.
Raising tensions?
Yeah, absolutely. If you see anything that's coming up that is, this is not in line with our philosophy, let's talk about it.
Oh, okay. Raising as in opening a conversation. I was like, it sounded like, let's make the tension higher.
No. Raising it as a concept piece. Yeah.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah. Just bringing here, I think, as Robin mentioned, it's not something like easily you cannot put into a box or without like outside this box. And I'm just talking about like from an academic perspective here. If you start like research in this topic, you probably jump in like 30 different like ways to define companies that have different ways of working. So even self-management is something different. It's hard for you to define. So maybe one thing I would like to adopt this concept of like radically companies who have radically remove hierarchy. It doesn't mean they don't have hierarchy at all, or that you don't have someone who is holding the torch or someone who is considered to be like the source of the organization. But I think that if we are willing to distribute decision making, if we're willing to have more transparent about what we are accomplishing together, if we have like this evolutionary purpose like guiding us instead of just someone telling you the rules, I think you can consider yourself going or moving towards like a more self-managed company. But definitely it's quite hard for you to define. But do you think you have some criteria? Like, I don't know, I'm very curious to know more about what Matt has mentioned about this maturity level. But definitely, if you are willing to do differently, if you're willing to share the power, if you're willing to be transparent, and there's only one, like, if you have at least, I wouldn't say everyone at the same hierarchical level, but at least the minimum possible, one or two, I think we are moving towards like a self-management model. But it's quite hard to find only one way to define it. But
Sure.
yeah, let's try the radical way of decentralizing companies. Yeah, I think I'd like this one.
Nice. Anybody else? Oh, and I saw there was a chat question too. Anybody has anything to share, throw it in the chat, and any of those links we will put in the post-event follow-up email so that everyone can have them as well. And it also is a summary from our AI will be out after this also. We normally share slides, but that doesn't apply here. So anybody else?
I think there's an interesting comment to be made. We're talking about who are the holders of power within, so-called self-managed organizations. And I had the pleasure of knowing Tony Hsieh prior to his death pretty closely. We ran Responsive Conference 2019 on Zappos HQ in downtown Las Vegas. And the complaints I often heard from employees of Zappos about the structure of the self-managed project that was Zappos, or also simultaneously the downtown project, was Tony doesn't want to hold the container of power, but then who does, right? And so it's this interesting question of self-managed, to your point, Kat, doesn't mean an absence of leadership, right? It means servant leadership, or I think can. But who are the people that people turn to for feedback, for advice, for that power to be given away? We had a very interesting conversation about this actually on stage at the 2019 Responsive between Brian Robertson, co-founder of Holacracy, and Alexis Gonzalez Black, who rolled out Holacracy at Zappos. So I'll drop that video into the chat. But it was this it's called a fireside chat. In this case, it was like fisticuffs in their friends, but it was a very fiery debate about where Holacracy did and did not work at Zappos. And so I think that question of who's holding power, and I don't by any means claim to have any answers, but it is, I think, a very important one to think about. Who are the power holders in any sort of self-managed or moving towards self-managed system?
Yeah, Robin, I want to add to that. Like, one of the things that O&A has surfaced is that formal or informal power as well, right? How is that? How does it surface in the organization in terms of influence, in terms of driving change?
One quick story tied to that, and then I'll get off my podium, is in 2016, I started a restaurant. I had not worked in restaurants other than bussing tables prior to that, and I did it in 3 weeks. And it was the same year that I was starting Responsive Conference, and it was very much, this is my effort to build a self-managed organization, a responsive coffee shop in San Francisco. And so, day one, I had 3 or 4 employees, and I asked them to pull out their phones, help them download Slack. We're going to create this digital manifestation of our brick and mortar coffee shop. And one pulls out a Razr flip phone, like a 1999 shiny Razr flip phone. The next pulls out a smartphone with the screen so badly damaged that you can't touch it without getting, sharp glass in your fingers. And the third doesn't have a phone at all. And this is a, millennial living in the Mission District in San Francisco in 2016. And so all of a sudden, I'm like, I have to radically rethink my expectations of what it means to share power with, I'm hiring baristas, right? And I'm trying to pay well, but I'm working on restaurant margins. Yeah. And so it's who are we working with? What are the power dynamics in place? And where are we starting from? I think is a really important question.
Very good learning tied to the last session with Albert and Ben, huh?
You're on mute.
Muted.
So yeah, last month we were down in Austin at a restaurant at Banger Sausage. So we were seeing how different restaurants run when you try to make them self-managing, and some of the experiments worked and some didn't. But also on that same trip, we were actually at Brian Robertson's house and did some recordings there. We didn't broadcast in there, but we did some recordings there. So both of your references were like, oh yeah. And then the month before that, Alexis Gonzalez Black was presenting there too. So it's interesting to see all of the pieces coming together. The part that you talked about with people having the different phones and the assumptions that we make, like, so you come up with an idea, and this happens with Dom and me too, right? So Phil and Dom, if you feel differently, we're kind of stuck because we consider ourselves sort of newbies to some of the self-managing stuff. We're just trying to learn. Is it self-managing if I go run with it without checking with him because I have the empowerment to do so? Or is it self-management for me to check in with him, which slows things down, but it's more collaborative, and instead of taking control and holding it myself? Even in those micro situations, it's hard to make the call as to what would be the most self-managing. And sometimes we just say, okay, in general, let's define the line. And sometimes it doesn't, it slows us down, or one of us takes off and go, oh, I considered something that you hadn't thought of, et cetera. So it's definitely a learning process, but I wonder if that happens on a macro in these businesses that we've been visiting. And
I can maybe share a perspective on that, Kat, because
not a question. I'm not behaving well as a panelist. Sorry.
We've encountered some of these things, right? Where do you fully assign empowerment, and where do you need to do an alignment?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, let's take a pause.
And who decides that?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So what we said was, what's really important to us is hiring the right fit and hiring the right people who understand and truly embodies that culture. Of course, we don't get that perfect, but what we said is we're going to assign the power to a team of 3 decision makers for that hiring process. And we will basically respect if they have all 3 said yes. Now, if one says no, it's an absolute no. Because we trust that the panel understands our culture, and we want to make sure that as a small organization, we will have the right fit in the team. So it is actually something that we've adapted in the way we define our roles. Yeah, so the hiring team takes, it's not a consent decision. It's actually a
veto.
Yeah.
Are other decisions made that way, or just hiring?
Just the hiring, because we truly believe that culture is very important for a very small company.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. I'll jump in on that. Thank you, Ria, for that. So kind of on that regard with, and we had the discussion on decision velocity last time, right? So Kat and I have internally had discussions on when do we have to consult with each other versus when can we kind of run with it. And we worked out if it's external facing, right? We had some issues with some of the invites for the events and stuff. So we said that's something that we check, other things we don't, these are in our scope of control. And bring that kind of back to, the original question when Kat was talking about, self-empowered versus self-managing. I was thinking about this leading up to this panel, and some of those terms like self-empowered or self-motivated, it has a sense that it's a very intrinsic, you kind of have it or you don't, which I don't really think is a correct dichotomy, but it is that. And then self-management, there is, can you control your emotions and blah, 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 but it's also, the environment and the structure and the roles and, the tensions and the holacracy. So it's actually our decision matrix and our, delegation, how we do it between ourselves, which is such a big factor, so we can have this evolving leadership, and I think it's also, somebody touched on it, naturally, sometimes when I need advice of a certain nature, I go to one person, I have another nature, I go to another, right? So it's not just so it is this evolving, not everybody has the same skill sets and how do we balance that? So yeah, it's, the structure, but not there. So I don't know. I'm still definitely growing in this space, but we're kind of working it out between us, I guess.
Kind of makes me think of the constraints conversation with Daniel Mezek. Maybe it's not a what is the answer, but what is not the answer. Or, right? My brain just took a bite out of itself. Anybody else on that same line? Kind of took several directions, but that's good. That's what we're here for. If not, then let's go. Let's circle back to the actual communities. What challenges have these communities had in the past or are having? It's very different. Like, there's no question. Like, I was at the Corporate Rebels investors group in September in Europe, and that was a huge group just for investors. They have a group called Chrysos, which is buying companies, and flipping them, which changes the dynamic when the people working are actual owners of the companies. So that's an interesting new type of approach, and they aren't the only ones doing it. I think there are others that are doing it. And then again, at their global meeting, and there's just no question to me from the experiences that I've had that there's just not as much community in the United States. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on why is that? Like, not just the United States, but North America in general. Why is it so much harder to build a self-managing community here than there? Do you agree that that's true? What challenges did you see, and how did you respond to them? Any thoughts?
I'll start by just piling on it being difficult in the US. I've been based in the extended San Francisco Bay Area for 15, 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely an ethos of, move fast and break things. We know how to do things in tech. And I'm maybe tech adjacent. These days, my day job is actually making media. We make commercials. But there's a sense of we're innovating on what we make in tech that then transposes to, we're also super innovative about how to structure organizations, which I think is in many cases false.
Don't leave me on that note. Tell me like an example.
Oh no, I don't have any answers. I don't at all claim to, I'm not an organizational design consultant, right? I think one of the things that makes me an effective curator of a community is I don't do the work of helping other organizations become more responsive, more self-managed, right? So I've been really blessed to know a lot of folks who work in this space and be able to curate them, but I actually don't have answers. I really just have examples of other people doing work and have tried various versions of that on my own in my own small companies. One other thing that I will say that I've seen now curating for more than 10 years, we're at 10 years of Responsive Conference, is the pendulum of whatever we want to say, right? Remote work or DE&I, or right, take any subset of a culture around these ideas.
Yeah.
I've seen DE&I, to take the current most controversial one, go back and forth between the murder of George Floyd and the movement for Black Lives, all the way to the Trump administration in the US and anti-DE&I is a very interesting pendulum swing, right?
Yes.
And it's like, okay, what are we doing here? And what are we doing here? And I believe that the answer almost always lies somewhere in between, like too far. Servant leadership is another example of, like, Steve Jobs was worshipped as a dictatorial leader. And then we saw this movement towards servant leadership and towards more inclusive, getting more voices in the room. And then we have Elon Musk and Donald Trump and other people who are leaders with sticks, right? And so I think that I don't have as much perspective into outside of the U.S. organizations, and so I want to hear from everyone else. But like that pendulum too, in all of these different things, remote work being another one, makes building self-managed organizations in the U.S. added difficult.
Are you saying the pendulum swings with more variance here in the U.S. than other places?
I don't know. I don't have enough information to say that that's true. I just, every time, I spend some time, Brian Elliott spoke on stage last year. He was a VP at Slack. And one of our first speakers at Responsive Conference in 2016 was Joel Gascoigne, the CEO of Buffer. Buffer at the time was radically transparent in the US and also the biggest fully distributed organization in the States at the time. And this is 2016. Then COVID happened and everyone went fully remote. And now there's these back to office policies. So I've seen that pendulum go at least twice now, very strong in both directions. And every time there's this sense of like, this is the first time no one has ever talked about remote and distributed work before. And it's like, I'm it was not a new thought when I was curating on it in 2016 with Joel, when he was talking about, every organization should be entirely in office or entirely remote. That was his viewpoint. That wasn't new at the time, but it was treated as new, and it was treated as new again in 2020. And it's treated as new again now when organizations are requiring everyone to return to the office 5 days a week, even if they live in a different state.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give a historical perspective. One of my clients is celebrating their 100th organizational birthday this year. And they were founded by Rockefeller after the coal wars in Colorado, where literally people were massacred during a strike. It was called the Ludlow Massacre. And we have this weird paradox in the US of being a democracy, but not having a very democratic labor tradition or workforce tradition. There has been serious power struggle. So it's like the one place, or one of the main places in the US where we really don't have a history of democracy. Given everything else we do democratically, we do not do workplaces democratically. We've been fighting about it. One of the things that this organization is wrestling with is we fund research into how to make the employer relationship better. But we've been fighting and working on the same things for decades, a century. It's baffling that is one place where democracy is not permeated into US society, is labor relations.
Ugh, Matt.
It's
brutal.
It's sad, but it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, people forget that we formed things like Workers' Voice and employee resource groups and unions in order to improve that relationship, because it can get ugly. It has gotten ugly in the past, and it could get ugly again. So I don't know why that is, but I see that self-management in Teal is a response to we need more democracy in our labor relations.
Yes. And then couple that with the movements of both AI and in the US, the silver tsunami, which is the awareness that the majority of money being exchanged right now is owners who are very, very, they're further along in their years. Their kids don't want their businesses. Money is going to shift. A whole lot of money is going to shift from being controlled by men to being controlled by women. And that is right around the corner. Then you have things being automated and jobs being eliminated drastically and at the same time. And so I think it draws us to things like self-management or whatever response we can put any hope in, right? To figure out how humans can be the least impacted from that. If you're one of the people who cares about humans being impacted, because there are other motivations at play in the same sandbox, right? Maybe it's opportunistic greed.
Right. But I'll put a plug in for Robin. The world is too complicated to be predictable anymore. We have to be responsive
anymore.
And so if you try to be controlling, if you try to be non-democratic, you're not being responsive, and it's just not going to work. Period.
A little context there. Thank you, Matt. The manifesto states that the rate of change continues to accelerate and the world is increasingly hard to predict, right? That was written in 2014, 2015, right? What I've been saying now is like, well, I guess we can carry it on this for all time, because the rate of change was moving incredibly quickly in 2016 and even faster in 2020. And now in 2026, right? Like, the executives of global companies that I know, like, are planning for tomorrow. They're planning for next week, right? I want to make sure that we bring AI into this conversation to some extent, because all of a sudden, I'm not a cutting edge technologist, but all of us are going to be managing AI agents 6 months from now, or at least 2 years. Right. Again, I'm not a futurist. I don't know. Right. But like, work has changed more in my lifetime than in my father's lifetime. And it's going to change more in the next 3 years than it has in our lifetime to date.
Yeah.
Which I wish that were not true in some ways. I really would like a stable environment to raise my children in, right? And to like, go on hikes with my dog in. And that is unfortunately not the world that we are living in or going to be.
At least a planet would be nice.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I didn't have enough existential dread coming into this panel, so I'm glad you covered that, and we can.
Yeah, 100%. Glad to be of service.
I would love to bring like a couple of other perspectives on it, and definitely thanks for bringing like AI into conversation, because I think this is another thing like after pandemic, for all of us who were working with self-management before pandemic, that was quite a huge shift because every company was pretty much just trying to survive, and then like to bring transformation, to bring like self-management back to the table, I think was like a huge challenge, and even more with AI, because every I think innovation project or innovation budget is still going to AI. So I think this is another challenge, but not specifically related to communities, but I think it's also my perspective on AI and how it impacts like self-management or to accelerate self-management in companies. But specifically for communities, I think we have like two big challenges, and it's not only because we are related to self-management. It's not because we are now in North America, but one thing is every time you're starting a new community, you do need a huge effort from people who are taking the lead on it, like maybe Robin, now Kat and Dom doing this, just leveraging the US community. And sometimes it can be like a burden, like it's a heavy thing. And mainly if you are just want to do something there is like very open to everyone, free, but it has a cost. And I think sometimes we are so, oh no, let's do it because it's important. It's something that is very important to us, like, or a small group of human beings, like really believe in, okay, let's do it till, but who pays this in the future? So I think this is a huge, I think Ria has a lot to say about it. This is one thing. I think the second thing is about the pure concept of self-management or the pure concept of TO. And actually, there's not a single way to define it, and it's very connected with values and beliefs. And so for some reason, my belief is different from Kat's belief or from Robin's, maybe I'm not going to connect with him because it's not something very, not only rational. We don't just put and write something. Maybe in a manifesto, it's more possible, or maybe agile, but I do believe self-management has so different layers or different ways to see it that you can start to make it more like fragmented. So I think this is another barrier I can see from communities that are connecting people who are willing like to do something different. But my community is doing different than your community, because your community is not only about the price, it's about the way you are implementing. So a lot of different things that make our work harder, but at the same time, it's good to see we have a space for different ways of doing it. But of course, it doesn't help us to connect. So this work you are doing here today, I think it's amazing because we're doing exactly like this. Like, we're connecting people with different ways of seeing T or self-management.
Good.
Yeah, Ria. I don't know, it's not Ria who has raised her hand first.
Dom first.
No, go for it.
I'm gonna have to surface attention at the end. No, I'm kidding. No, thanks. And I'm gonna jump off what Dachi was saying there. Yeah, I mean, kind of why it's taken some time to take off here. Agile. It was a complicated concept, but a lot of people, they got into it with Scrum, and it was wasn't exactly totally agile, but it was simple, and they could practice it, and then over time, people became experts and internalized it. This kind of growth, with self-management, it seems that it has kind of a higher shelf to jump into. I was thinking about my experience with it is, growing up in school, I'm going to blame the schools, I guess is what I'm saying. So we didn't have much education, kind of taking the systems thinking or taking a step back and looking at our group dynamics so much. That was something you kind of learned outside of the classroom in your social aspects, right? You had your friends groups and they evolved and they merged together, and you had your little shufflings of power and stuff. But in the classroom, we learned about voting, and that's it, and what three branches of the government. So I think because we don't take a look at this human behavior too much, maybe that's just my experience. it's just kind of hard to actually, like, as adults, to look back and take a look at how we're evolving and how that influenced our behavior. So yeah, maybe having a manifesto, like, the responsive manifesto, just something simple we can kind of get around, and that's something that helps.
Are you saying that in typical education systems, we don't put an emphasis on how we are organizing? Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's just my experience. I'm sure a lot of people have.
I would agree. At least in
um,
the typical American public
Yeah.
school system, it's not important to make us a cog in the wheel. So why would we invest in people being free? That's not true
Well,
everywhere. I think that there
Not
are.
a- sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Kat. It's
Yeah,
just
go
like
for
so many studies and so much evidence of the education system traditionally publicly in the United States is we sit in chairs, there are bells,
Right.
just like on assembly line, that dictate where we are moving to the night, right? So like absolutely so much of education is built on an assembly line. And
Yep.
so it stands to reason that then when we enter the workforce, we're looking for the teacher in the front of the room to tell us what to do. The other thing tied to that is, and I love this idea of like, we learn social elements outside of the classroom. It's so true. I've never seen an organization surpass the maturity of the person or people leading that organization. And I've never seen a self-managed organization where the people internal to the organization don't want to do the work of self-management, and particularly the hardest work, which is introspection.
Yeah. Robin, I want to pull that back a layer because in one of my conversations with Frederick Laloux, he also really called that out. Like, how can I expect my organizations to move into a consciousness level beyond me when I, as the leader of that organization, is not in that level of consciousness yet? And that's actually something that really sticks to me when it comes to self-management.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I wanted to pull. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, Kat, I just wanted to, I'm not an expert in American communities and landscapes, but I want to offer a few things for thought here. When it comes to building communities, we often start as a benevolent, kind of like purpose-driven community that is not actually economically focused, right? So the thing with that is it's great and it's motivating, it's inspiring, and you bring people together. But when it comes to sustainability, purpose alone does not sustain a community. And that's super important to think about, right? So really, like nurturing a community is so important to have people focus in nurturing it. That also you need to have the fuel to have people continue to nurture that community. And that's one of the things that I would say we learn from Teal Around the World. And it's also, yeah, and if you don't have the money to actually fund that, you need to think about a business model that can actually fund that community going forward. That's just one of the things that I would say there, whether it's donations, whether it's ticketing, whether, I don't know, like there are several ways to do that. The other thing is, and Robin, you were talking about earlier about, remote work and stuff, and how does that impact self-management? If you think about the Dunbar study, you would also think like the level of connections deepens when we start meeting each other. And in the context of our world today, where everyone's kind of like just meeting virtually, that sense of intimacy, when you actually meet in person, it doubles down or triples, right? So communities that are successful meet on a periodic basis, not every day, meet in person as well. And that's kind of a difficult construct coming from a pandemic where we were like, oh, I can actually do stuff from home now. I don't need to go out because the traffic is real bad. And yeah, so that also has an impact on how we build communities today. And it's not so much America or something. I mean, in Europe as well, it's quite expensive to travel around Europe to meet everyone. But people who rely on purpose and meaning and connections, they can make that work, and they would travel to actually build those relationships.
That's us. I would agree with that. Like, we're kind of seeing that as we build this. And I think Dom and I, we're rolling this idea around in the beginning just because we both come from Agile. Agile had such a robust community, as Dom was describing earlier. And we kept looking at this saying, why does the self-management community not have the same? And I think your point is related to that answer. And that is, it was commercialized. Like there was an Agile industrial reason for those communities to exist. They were making a whole lot of money off certifications. There were really only two competing bodies, which meant that there wasn't a whole lot of dilution between several other communities. And so they, to some extent, kind of allowed these regional or whatever organic meetings to pop up and happen, which perpetuated the industrial cycle and had gave it a concrete reason to reinvest. And we don't have that. But in your communities, has there been an attempt to do that? Anything that was successful, anything that was not, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah.
I have two quick thoughts. First of all, I think we can't acknowledge Agile without pointing out that it came from software development in 2001, right? So it rode the wave of software development over the last 20 years, right? It was started by, 17 software engineers, software developers, right? And so very specific industry riding the wave of growth that came with technology, right? And yes, has grown beyond that, but it when we say self-management, that is too broad to define, right? Every single person here will have a different definition of what is self-management,
True.
right? Versus if I am a software engineer looking at a manifesto written by software engineers for people like me, it's much easier to quote Seth Godin to say, people like us do things like this.
Got it. I see. So there's an automatic sort of sense of belonging and clear definition to those communities.
Yeah. And then the other piece is,
go ahead.
Sorry, Matt. Just communities are hard, right? And we touched on this, Matt. You had such a great point that it's hard to make change if you don't make money. I want to quote you on that. But also community itself, right? Everyone says, oh, I want to start a community, right? And I've had lots of failures. I can go into them in terms of trying to do masterminds. And then I was like, I'm bringing these incredible heads of transformation from McDonald's and from GE together around the edges of Responsive Conference, but I literally have nothing that I sell them and no profit model, and I'm just spending my time, and I can't afford to do that, right? And as an entrepreneur, like, those were interesting experiments, but those are not profitable communities, right? Community is easy to say we want. It is hard to build, and it is hard to build sustainably. So Kat and Dom, right, appreciate the work you're doing, appreciate the work of Corporate Rebels that has been doing this for 10 years, right? And it's a question of what is the community that we are building, and then what is sustaining that.
And frankly, Agile came from a profit motive. How can we make more money, be more successful as software developers? That is it, pure and simple.
Is self-management not the same?
It did not come from that. I mean, if you go back to, like, for the Teal roots, Frederick Laloux was a McKinsey consultant, and he realized the stuff we're selling people is not making them more successful. It's a sham.
Is that a financial motivation then? He was trying to improve businesses.
He was, and he found he was failing. And so he said, we need to do something deeper. We need to be more personal driven. It has to be more of a conscious raisingness than purely profit. You can be more effective as a teal organization, or you can just be happier as a teal organization and make the same amount of money. It's not necessarily profit driven.
Yeah. And in fact, if you think about his philosophy and his approach, his book, it's not behind a paywall. You can donate if you want, but you can download it for free. It's really by principle that he doesn't believe there's one size fit all, like how do you run a teal organization, but here's some thoughts to get you started in it.
Yeah.
But it has to fit the model of where you're starting from.
Nice.
Yeah.
On that same note, one of the questions that we had, if you guys don't mind me pivoting, feel free to jump back and forth as however you like, but any tips for anybody who's looking to move toward, like, what's a good suggested first step for somebody who's trying to become more self-managing in their organization? This could be for a leader, founder, some person with power, or maybe not a person with power, either one.
Just organize, just bring people together, right? I go back to my roots as a community organizer of, like, just exactly what you're doing here, but even more in person, right? I love that Kat and Dom, you've been traveling around the world to meet people. Go find people, local businesses, go knock on doors, go talk to people and organize free events where people can gather to talk about these things, right? A topic of like, how is AI, and I'll then stop with AI, influencing your organization and how your organization works, right? And the number of people who will flock to that, because honestly, if someone doesn't have the capacity to organize groups of people coming together to talk about shared topics of interest for free, right? Like that's the easy step. Then actually doing the work, then whatever. So get your reps in, get your practice by literally just bringing people together to share ideas. And you don't have to be the expert in the room, right? You just have to bring the people together and say, let's learn from each other.
I love
I'm definitely the living proof that you don't have to be the expert in the room, because all you have to do is call them and bother them and just be like, go to this cool party.
And it's amazing. It's amazing how people are so generous that they're willing to share.
Yes, including yourself. Thank you. Were you talking about yourself when you gave that compliment?
I'm just the curator. Again, I don't have answers. I just go to people who do and learn from the best.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I'd love to add to that, because gathering people is one part of the equation, but also having influence from different layers where you can actually sustain that momentum and that energy is such a powerful, I would say, anchor to help really build on your momentum. So if you have someone super inspiring like Doug, or someone like, a big personality who can really work a crowd and inspire, that would be really one of the things that will build that momentum. And then you have more people joining in the whole movement, right? And in large organizations, I've seen that as well. So coming back to ONA, you will understand who has a formal power and informal power. They're the ones that will bring influence into the organization.
Just really quick before we pivot to Matt, can you expand on formal and informal power for those of us on the call that may not know?
Yeah. So when you think about formal power, they're the ones who are appointed to certain roles, certain hierarchy in the organization. Those hold formal power. They have decision-making rights. They have all of that. Informal power holders are positioned at the periphery of the organization, or they actually have a following. They are respected leaders informally that are influencing behavior, that are influencing conversations and dialogue. That's basically how you differentiate those two.
Thank you. What do you think, Matt?
I would say there's actually an easy way to think about all of this. Do two things. Experiment with things that are safe enough to try. And two, reflect on the results.
Safe, ew.
And then repeat. Rinse and repeat.
Exactly.
I would like to add something that is very connected with Robin mentioned, that if we're talking about people, because definitely we need to share power, right? So there is like a human component. We need somehow to be human oriented or people driven. We need to be willing to listen to people, right? And sometimes I think that's the thing, that we think we just want to apply some methodology and we are becoming self-managed. The first thing is, are we open to listen to what other people are bringing? Like, okay, I can invite people to bring their ideas, but am I open enough to accept or to embrace what they are bringing? Am I open enough and looking inside yourself to accept that you are going to relearn how to work, or not going to be, you can keep being like the leader, as we are going to leverage leadership among the whole company, but are you ready not to be the person, like, or to lose control? I think this is one of the most basic things. Like, we learn that if you have the control, you are safe, or you try to be safe to embrace any challenge in your company, but are you willing to lose control at some point? And are you willing to listen to people and be ready to, whenever like you're going to present? I think this is super important. I think if you check at least this, you can start just trying and experimenting, because if you are not open, how can you start like adopting other like strategies? So this would be my
That goes, so your mention of sharing power reminds me of Robin's earlier comment about the ceiling of an organization's ability to evolve to be the most organic. I'm not using your words. I don't remember exactly how you phrased it. Belongs to whoever the leader is, right? That the limitation or constraint is associated with the person who won't share the power and has it.
That's it.
Anybody else want to add anything? I don't remember what the question was. What was the question? Oh, obstacles to creating communities. Dom, I'm sure you've got some for us to share.
Sure. I'll say for like companies, like it's kind of like what Matt was saying. I would say change is hard. If you think about it as being like literally the neurons in your brain making new connections, you can see why it's so energy, it takes so much energy for people around you. So pick something small like decision velocity. You know, you can create, and decision ownership rights on a team that has easy to measure metrics, and show a proof of concept and, get people introduced to it, and then go from there. Start small, go up, because if you exhaust people, they'll confuse their mental exhaustion of change with the concept you're trying to get them to grasp, and they'll just end up not liking it. So start small, iterate, like Matt said.
Nice. That went really fast. This was a really great talk. I really appreciate everybody's time. And we will send out the AI notes and summary. We'll send out you guys the recording. Thank you everyone for attending. This was we really appreciate it, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you so much,
Thanks for putting this
Kat and
together.
Dom.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
It's amazing to be here. Thank you.
That's great.